This presentation was recorded at the Best Practices for Pollinators Summit. For more information, contact pollinatorfriendly.org.
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Thomforde, and I'm a restoration ecologist for Stantec. And I've been involved in restoration ecology for, goodness, I don't even want to say, but lots of acres and lots of experience. And I think when I started this, there was a few pioneers ahead of me. And a few people started at the same time I did. And there were no books, there were no BMPs. This was not most agencies. Fish and Wildlife Service was doing some, but otherwise people were, what is that? Why would you plant weeds, you know? So it was it really, those first waves, we had to learn as we went. So it was really kind of an interesting time. But so today I'm going to talk about what Savannah is. And Evan and I followed up one another, I think, it was like last April. And so we gave a talk similar. So there's a lot of similarity between these two talks. So everything I tell you today is going to be more for to inspire you to think. I'm not going to be fact oriented or this is the exact amount or anything like that. I don't, that's kind of a command and control. And the more I've done restoration, the more, like Evan and I heard him say, surprises I'm like constantly, what happened here? The less I realize I don't know. And so instead of a lot of facts and how to and command and control, that's a Holling concept, command and control. I'm just going to try to inspire you to think about, you won't agree with everything I'm saying, but if I can get you to come away going like, interesting, that's my objective for the day. Senators are all around the world, and they're just amazing. I saw a whole presentation once down at um, a prairie enthusiast conference where the gentleman did a whole conversation, 20 minutes, about growing up in Oak Grove. And then he went to the Oak Grove school, and he went to Union Grove for college, and he went to, and then finally they buried him in the Burr Oak Cemetery. And that was the whole thing, just to show how ingrained. You think about every time you hear the town Oak Grove, Elk Grove, this Grove, that Grove, Union Grove, Grove City. Yeah, Savannah, pretty powerful. So first of all, let's go, what is a savanna? We'll run through this. And it's actually a North American term. It was the Taino people in the Caribbean when the Spanish made early contact. That's the way they described this landscape, was savanna. So I think that's interesting because it makes people, when you use it in the general public, it makes people think of Africa, and it's really a North American word. So we'll look at it around both the space and time to kind of get what we're looking at and what we mean by savanna. But just a couple of things to think about right away. Evolutionary savannas are extremely, no matter where you are on Earth, they're extremely evolved ecosystems. They've been really ramping up over the past 30 million years. And you get to the really epitome of ecosystem function. These things, all these organisms are organized and connected, and the energy and the nutrient cycles through food webs primarily are flowing, and that's where the nutrients flow. And when the nutrients are remodified by all these organisms, coming out in dung and going into a fungal cycle, into a bacteria cycle, into an insect cycle, feeding another bird. I mean, these boosts in food web production, it's like a turbocharge. That moves the nutrients to the perfection of ecosystem services. So when you're thinking of ecosystem services, think of food webs, think of those complexities, think of savannas being one of the epitomes ever on Earth of that work. And the concept is ecosystem phenomenology. It's not only scientifically cool from a mathematical point, but from it's a miracle into itself. When you see that, and the math is there, thermodynamics, like ecosystem phenomenology. And then you realize, oh my God, it is a miracle how this happens through the DNA, but the ecosystems align and really share. So savannas represent a very powerful system. So let's take a look at it around the world here. And we're very familiar with the Midwest savanna, of course. We also have a terminology of oak woods and forests, and I'm going to challenge that today. And I think that might be kind of a dangerous interpretation. And I'll kind of argue that through this presentation, which again, just something for you to think about. There's a lot of different names for oak savanna. That was oak barrens. Here's Oregon savanna, California savanna. Spain and Dehesa, or the Montato in Portugal. This is, when I found out about this system, if I ever had another kid, I was gonna name him Dehesa. I just was fascinated by this whole multi-hundred, maybe centuries, not centuries, but millennia old, as far back as language goes, of people in this region, millions of acres of oak savanna. And they take the cork off the oak, they use the firewood, they use construction, they graze the acorns and the grasses in between it. It's this whole agricultural system that has existed for possibly thousands of years down there. It's super, super cool. So look that up if you want to really understand how agro ecosystems. I think this is an amazing model. England's oaks, got to go over that shades of Sherwood Forest. So this, go back to this. This is in England, and it's called the New Forest Farm. And when the Normans invaded, like 1180 AD, they preserved a hunting area, and they said, "We'll let people graze in here, but that's it." And they called it New Forest Farm, like 1,000 years ago. I always get the European perspective versus ours for time. It's really interesting. Up in
Hey,
Sweden.
hey, Steve, I hate to interrupt. Is it possible you can turn your audio up?
Oh yeah. Are you having trouble hearing me?
It's pretty clear, but it's just quiet.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's a volume thing maybe, or
Let's see. How to escape from the main screen then?
well, you shouldn't have to. Okay. Maybe try your headset. We can see if that's louder.
Got it. So back to Savannah. That's Aspen Parkland up in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and again it wraps all the way around the northern hemisphere. Come on there. How's that? Test.
It's
Test,
about the
test.
same,
Is it really?
but it's okay. Just
Okay.
keep going, Steve. We can hear you.
Okay. People say better. Oh, we did the Aspen Parklands all around the world. And again, remember, these are very recent species. Again, these are not ancient trees, but these are the products that have come out in the past 80 million years. Birch groves. This painting was painted in 1889 in Russia. And there's a town up here in the North Shore called Birch Grove. So again, I think you look at those names and you kind of get a feeling. I think we're losing a lot of our oaks. And we'll see the same way we're losing our birch, same way we're losing our aspen. So even up here in the Northland, our aspen are just about at the end of their life cycles and they're collapsing. The birch are at the end of their life cycles, they're collapsing, and there's no regeneration, like the red pine that Evan was talking about, like the oaks that we're looking at throughout the northern hemisphere. So anyways, it's some interesting, pine groves and pine savanna, another around the world. You'll see this, drive out to the Rocky Mountains and the Front Range is just all savanna like this, lodgepole and ponderosa. These are in Georgia. Here's jack pine barrens in Wisconsin. I love this one, Timberline Savannah, the kid's riding a reindeer, just like, I got robbed in my, looks like he's got a yak over there against the fur, or they could be tamarack. Boreal savanna up in Russia, where a lot of reindeer come and graze and moose graze. Alpine meadows again. I mean, these are all savannas. I love this tundra savanna wrapping around the earth. Africa, of course. I want to go to that place, right? Those baobab trees, they don't even look real. Brazilian savanna. I mean, 2/3 of South America is grassland and the pampas. Australia. Even in the Appalachian Mountains, you're finding the Southern Initiative grasslands, which would be great to talk to some people down there next year. But they're just saying that no, this is a lot less forest and a lot more savanna, and so it's really interesting. This is a very old map, and some people, I'm going to say to some people, this is kind of it's kind of folklore to me in a way. That the transition between prairie and forest, that savanna was a transitional state. So I think of that as folklore. And I think in reality, they may grow in the same spots pretty close to one another. They will grade, but that's because it's an environmental gradient you're looking at. And that's where the fires and the herbivores may have been less impactful, and the oak would have, or the oak or the birch or the pine would have a greater opportunity to get hold because they just burned less or they were grazed less for whatever reason. But remember that, and we'll find out, we'll talk about this, the concept of savanna and the concept of forest are separated in time by 35 million years. So it's a completely different ecosystem in that process. So I like to think, and I'm going to ask you to just think, that the trend, the ecosystem phenomenology of Earth was towards the terrestrial component, one giant savanna, and these are recent plants, recent mammals, and recent human beings. And I put Da Vinci's unisex human down there at the bottom because just like what Evan was saying, it's funny because I was doing this presentation here today and just dropping in, it's like I need a person, and absolutely. Because we're a huge part of our ecosystems, and we can do the right way. Like Warren Beatty said in the movie, Heaven Can Wait, when they're killing dolphins in the net, he's like, let's just do it the right way. Let's do agriculture and all this other stuff. And I said, don't pollute the atmosphere and the waters. And so it's just a temporal distinction again. The forest really disappeared on that fateful day long ago. And it took about 30 million years after that meteorite hit the Earth for the next wave. And these extinction waves that come 20 to 30 million years later are always more advanced. And you go from the Model T to some of the automobiles or diesel trucks we got now, or electric vehicles, So it's really a cool thing to think about like that. Really ramping up, and this is North America, it's Nebraska, it's 20 million years ago. There's really some good papers out there, again, from these people that think in these ways. Systems Greg Vertelak, and he said that the ice ages were the cause of the savanna extent across the earth, grazing mammals, and then fire, and eventually people, or just wildfires, and the people using fires that created so much biochar, which took so much carbon out of the atmosphere and the roots of those plants, and the burning into charcoal, cold fire instead of hot fire, that ice ages came. And he debunks all the other stories in this paper. It's really cool. And I think global cooling, Greg Vertelak looked that up. It's an amazing paper. So if we look at savanna wrapping around the world, and we look at its evolutionary advancement, and then we think about it from the laws of thermodynamics and some of Howard Odum, love this guy. If we think about it from him and just the calories or the photons or the electrons coming in from the sun, and all the different nutrient cycles are just run off of that. And again, think of the dung and think of the dead animal. These food cycles just keep blossoming like that, and they go back into plants, and it's just a never-ending cycle with that sunlight energy coming as the pumps. Savanna is one of the best at doing that. So, the way it did it too, this is kind of cool. Savanna did this, our grassland savannas did this by becoming more edible. Now you think of that. Do they teach us in botany that, and after a while, the plants evolved more edible to feed herbivores? Or did they teach, and then plants defended defenses to beat, the herbivores away? It's like, I know what I was taught. And so when I looked at the phylogeny of these plants, and I'm like, oh my God, these are some of the most edible families on the planet Earth. It just kind of cool. So anyway, so think about the greater edibility as this time went by too. And again, where those nutrient cycles go, most of those nutrient cycles are the healthy soil is completely about nutrient cycles, water purity, soil health. It's just our plant community is all about these nutrient cycles. So healthy ecosystems will get that for us. So savanna, we can safely say that savanna became the most advanced, powerful, functional, and provisional terrestrial ecosystem ever on the Earth. And that's just such a cool concept, all on real-time solar energy. Produce, purifying all that water, building all those soils, giving us all that beautiful food and fruits and materials to build things with savanna. So that's kind of a cool concept. And I've heard it said it's the cradle of humanity with savannas, and maybe I haven't looked into this one yet. Maybe next paper. But just some general things. Think of savannas as being a grassland with grassland trees. because the trees that are in the savannas evolved at the same time as the grasses and the mammals. So it sounds like grasses with grasslands with grassland trees. And we find all around the world at different densities, but about at 12 standards. Those are the big guys that they really couldn't cut with stone tools. They left those for the acorns. And then they fatten their cattle and pigs on it type situation. They were called the 12 standards. And once you move beyond that, it starts to get dangerous fast. And you can suddenly go off a cliff, catastrophic regime shifting, and go into a deep alternative dysfunctional state. So the one thing that we have to see too is that you need to keep those nutrients moving through the savanna for the health of the savanna, like your heart pumping. We had to eat the savanna, and that's what the herbivores were doing to gain that energy to get those nutrient flows. So it is highly dependent upon biomass harvest, fire and grazing, totally dependent. So this provides us an amazing model for sustainability on the planet Earth as we move forward into hopefully living in a fossil-free environment soon. And the belief that our technology is going to save us. So I think Savanna offers us a chance for just to teach us a lot of different ways to really, maximize real-time solar energy regionally, and there's the ultimate solar panel. I think oaks, if you go way back into the proto oaks, you're looking at 125 million years of evolution. The Quercus is 30 million and newer. Quercus, that's the level. But tragically, most of these savannas exist in this condition right here, and it's a catastrophic condition. We'll learn about that. A site that I do a lot of work at, beautiful area. That's Bloomington in 1910, and almost about the same spot, just maybe a mile away upriver, but same aspect, same soils, everything is what it looks like today. It's quite a transition, and it is catastrophic. There's the soils. They've washed away most of the old horizons, been gone for 20 years. In many places you can see several feet of soil have eroded around the roots of the existing oak trees. Those are basically all native plants in there. I took this specifically for that. Look at all the stuff rotting nitrogen, and there's no uptake in it. So the soils are just, at this point, really rich in nitrogen. There's been no biomass harvest, no fire, no grazing animals since we kicked the last people out about 80 years ago. So interesting, the vegetation that you see on the ground, none of it's edible. So rabbits, white-footed deer mice, woodchucks, don't live there. The deer will run in there to hide, but they eat the food in the people's yards. There's nothing edible in there. And the funny thing is, we made it a wildlife refuge. So again, it kind of some paradox. So let's figure out what happened here. And I'm going to use Holling's framework here. I love this guy. And he said that natural areas degrade, areas that we manage for nature degrade for two proximal reasons. And one's a loss of a keystone species. So losing a keystone species or process. And the other one's social mess, like fire is bad. This is the model that we've been using in looking at catastrophic regime shift or alternative stable states. And A is the functional happy zone. Everyone's happy. It's a clear water state. It's a very healthy savanna, open, 250 species of flowers and grasses on the ground, insects, birds, mammals, running around. So that's the happy zone, a crystal clear water. But it takes these stressors. Literally, we lose these keystone processes, like we lost grazing, and then that made fire go away. And then along came a non-native plant, and boom, it went right over the cliff. And that's where B is. B is the cliff, and C is where it lands. Okay, unfavorable euphemisms, completely dysfunctional. The energy and the nutrient cycles are completely broken. There's no more food webs, and I'll get to that in a second. To restore it, look where we have to go. We just start rolling that ball up the hill, and we get to D, and now we got to lift. And that's what we need to restore, is that lift. So that'll help us kind of get to that. Out of the way, the ball cup, maybe you've heard of these before. There's the Savanna state up there, by golly. And if we start to take away those keystone processes, we lose resilience. Bam, the ball jumps down there in the dysfunctional state. That's what the dysfunctional state is like. And that's where this was first used. Catastrophic regime first used by limnologists like Martin Scheffer in the Netherlands and Steve Carpenter down in Madison. Rangelands, Brian Walker, the big resilience guy, and it's spread this year. There's two papers that came out talking about North American prairies going through catastrophic regime shift. My first paper, Catastrophic Regime Shift in Oak Savanna, I'm presenting on it today, 2009, when I was in my grad school, and I got a B on that paper, so I was happy. So Catastrophic Regime Shift of Oak Savanna. Here's the ball in the cup model. There's the happy savanna. We get rid of, we get rid of a couple, oh, no, the ball is happy. The wet period is more savanna-like, fewer grazers. Hot and dry and lots of grazers is more prairie-like. But as soon as we get rid of the grazers, this is just a complete model. We lose resilience. And now we got the trees out of the way, it's disconnected, and an invasive species comes in, and now we're surrounded by buckthorn. So that's how these kind of work. So let's look at the Z scheme here. And let's see each number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is a different process we lose. And so let's see what those are. So number 1, and this is a chronology. So this scheme forces a chronology. What happened first? What happened next? What happened next? What happened next? And you're trying to see how this really happened. It's complete modeling. It's a story. It's a narrative. What we're trying to understand why this system collapsed, and that'll help us fix it. So number 1, we took the herbivores off the land twice, in the Wilmington River Valley, and in a lot of places actually. And this forced people, there's no more food. So they're forced into internment camps or reservations, okay? And so, because they can't live on the land, there's nothing to eat, so why would you use fighting animals? Now we really no fire, no herbivores, and the stuff is just rotting and rotting, totally novel. It's like a meteorite hit the planet, killed all the herbivores and the people that were living on fire. And the nitrogen builds up to a point that you hit a threshold, and faster, taller growing plants. A lot of times the bur oaks are all just going sky high because nothing there to eat them, no fire, and the high nitrogen. And then here come the faster trees. It's the ash trees, the elm trees, and all of a sudden the whole ground gets shaded out. And it's bare soil, high nitrogen, really shady, and then a species like, well, it would have to like nitrogen, grow super fast, be shade tolerant, buckthorn. Yeah. So that explains how the buckthorn came. So if you think like that, you may even say buckthorn's not invasive then, is it? No, it's not. It's really symptomatic of high nitrogen soils and the loss of biomass harvest that cause eutrophication. That, oh wow, it's like, yeah, and we call them invasive species. So we still have to get rid of them, but we need to try to cause. So that's kind of what this kind of looks into also. So anyways, number 5 is the threshold, and then boom, we're in the catastrophic state. Oh, there it is. Same thing, 1, 2, 3, 4. We lose that, the herbivores up on top, forces the human off the landscape, nitrogen builds up, bam, eutrophication. And so now we're down at C. We're way down there, we're in this catastrophic condition, we gotta roll the ball back up. And here's the concept of hysteresis. You can't go back to where you came from, because you were on the edge of the cliff when you collapse. And most of our restoration does that. So we have to go back to, that where the bend is, and it's just complete modeling here, but that's where it was. We have to get back to that, get that biomass harvest going again, so we can burn again, so we can get back to it. We put it back on the ball, on the edge. We clear the buckthorn, maybe a couple other trees, and we restored it. That's what we've done. Come back a decade later, and it's right back. I heard Evan talking about out on Park Point, just how quickly it just reverted back. Same, or after the herbicide control, it just reverts back. We need to restore the process, and we'll get there. So there's hysteresis, I'm bringing back the animals, and I'm getting those nutrient cycles in control again. The diversity's skyrocketing. The flowers are coming, the pollinators are coming back into that system. I've got birds all over the place, and we can keep those nutrients through those food webs at that point. And we're probably there. Wow. So let's, just as the summary, we remove the people, we remove their animals, food webs collapse, nutrient cycles collapse, regime shift. We created a wildlife refuge, and there's no wildlife in the wildlife refuge. I was the vice president of the Friends of that wildlife refuge, and my dad actually helped establish that. So I'm very well connected, and the people that work there, and the whole US Fish and Wildlife system is an amazing system. It's our stories we tell that is imperative here. So literally, to fix the system, I have to restore that biomass harvest up on top, restore humans back on the land again, like crazy. Like, let's say that Bloomington site is 8,000 acres, which it is. If I restore it, I'm gonna need people down there. Researchers, students, retired people, laborers on the fence lines, people doing restoration, people watching the animals we've got down there. People are living in small little villages here and there like they have for thousands of years. And then it's transhumant, they move out of it. So anyways, now I got jobs, I've got a lot of different cool ways we can do it that way. So let's go back down. So now you've seen those processes. We've lost the keystone processes. That was Holling's first one. Let's go into Holling's social myth. And this is where you might find, you may not agree with me. I guess that's the best way to put it. But again, the objective of this is just to make you think about what I'm saying in a fun way. So here's some social myths. At first I was kind of like, what do you mean by that, Holling? Okay, fire's bad, I get it. But over the years, I've come to see different stories we tell that may be actually not helping us in the long run, like oak woods and oak forests. It's right back to the threshold state. What about pine, birch, and aspen? Are they really forests or are they grasslands? Are they grassland trees, invasive species? Too many deer. I've come a long way. I'm on the other end of the spectrum now, but think about the millions of bison and elk and beaver that were on the land. We think there's too many deer. Maybe it's better to think of there's not enough herbivores. It's a complete opposite way to think, but it's like, it makes so much sense. This is not an oak forest at all. There's no ground layer. It's all pole trunk trees. Even if there's spring ephemerals there and they all go away, that's considered in Europe, at least Europe and there, they consider that extreme shade, a novel disturbance. It's killed off everything else from forming spring ephemerals. And that's Philip Grime, amazing ecologist. There's forest. God, is that beautiful, all those primitive plants. And it's so rare on Earth that we should do everything to identify what true forest is and make sure that we do not harm these systems. I'm in southeast Minnesota. I know there's probably one up there. It's the northeast slope. That's where you really find a lot of our really true hardcore forest. Oh, that's a sick piece of land right there. And again, this is in what we call a forested area, part of the big woods. And I see nothing but overgrown trees. I think we actually have a myth of forest. I wrote this back in 2000, can you believe it? It was my first PowerPoint presentation. We burned them onto CDs. It wasn't well received, but it may not be today either, but let's go through it. It's actually kind of a colonial ecology to me because, Bambi's mom, when she says, man, it's in the forest. Well, I have people who live on the land for thousands of years ago. So it's thinking like that, and they used fire a lot. And what do we mean by forest? There's no operational definition. That doesn't have a scientific definition. There's 800 definitions around the world. And the original definition had nothing to do with trees. So, but we've adopted it. It's kind of an interesting story. I like to think of it as an assemblage of organisms that were 65 years old and older in origin, so much more primitive. We can think of it as the disaster taxa that survived the Cretaceous meteorite impact, and then were replaced by the angiosperms, flowering plants and fruit plants, and then grays, graminoids, and the grassland trees. And I think forests is more like gray, are found today in these grays fire shadows, and they're in the same spot. But grazers can't go, fire can't go. It's usually too steep, too wet, too shady, and that's where you find the forest. An amazing, beautiful. Another way you can tell there's no buckthorn. You got buckthorn in woods, it wasn't a forest. Because all the forest right outside of Duluth, Winona, Minnesota, walk right up in the Holson's Lodge, and it's still pretty intact. Where all the surrounding bluffs that were more savanna-like are just something you can't even walk through. So because the buckthorn is so big, but not in the forested areas. It's complete whole ecosystem. So that's how rare it is. Kind of the timeline where we get the dominant plants. The lilies and the buttercups go back into the dinosaur days. Way to go, guys. And that's why they're so cool. And that was a bad day on Earth. We're not gonna talk about the Younger Dryas impact theory, but if you're really interested in probably where the ice ages would and how 260 megafauna died off at the same time the Globus people died off, and why there's these meteorite holes that are kind of found all around the northern hemisphere that seem to come out of the TARDIS meteorite shower that we receive twice a year. Look into that, and that may explain why the boreal forest belts throughout the Earth occurred after the extinction that occurred 12,000 years. Just kind of an interesting concept. But then out of that 30 million years ago came our grassland savannas around the planet. It was a very cool time. Highest edibility, highest ecosystem function, highest of the ecosystem services. So where I find forests is usually in a driftless area, and it's going to be in those northeast facing slopes. The one that's kind of in the left side, the highest one up on the left side, that's on the Cannon River. And that woods down there is truly the furthest I've ever been north and west of true forest vegetating, dominating just acres across that landscape. And once you walk out of that, you get into the area where the glacial drift was. The forest integrity just drops off, and a lot of those species they spread by seed by ant. So I read a paper from Canada where they said an ant can carry a buttercup seed like an anemone 35 miles in 16,000 years, where savannah seed is spread by mammals and birds. That's just right behind the glaciers. It's kind of an interesting thought. So I'm going to say that we need to rethink what forest is, and literally that then falls into a lot of our plant community targets that we use. The Marshner map. Francis, great story. Francis Marshner never came to Minnesota, wrote this, he did this map in the 1930s, and then Bud Henselman found this map and brought it back to us. It's just a wealth of information about the plant communities that were in Minnesota at the time of the public land survey. Keith Went, Barbara Coffin, both the DNR, that was their title. At the time of the public land survey. That's the title right there. That's a beautiful title. I mean, that's an A++ college. I just took this morning. That's Duluth down there. This is another map. It's the same data, but this Mr. Trigg is telling a completely different story. That's Duluth. They call it Portland now. See those red trails? Those are human trails. Those are human trails that connected the North Shore to Lake Vermilion over to the Ely area. And they've been used for thousands of years. And that's where our roads go up today, Old Vermilion Trail and stuff like that. So that's really cool. The sugar, you can see where the sugar bushes were in there. But I wanted to point out this, see the green areas? That's where the white pine was. That's where the timber was. Other areas were, some of them very open, not too far from here up in the Meadowlands. They're trying to save the area for sharp-tailed grouse by Cotton, Minnesota, which is basically also known as the lesser prairie chicken. So what was between those pines, you know? What are those white spots in there? Beaver meadows, fire recently burned over, like we don't know, but again, maybe it was pine growth. When they walked through Bloomington, the original public land survey, they said, this is oak, and this is aspen, and this is hazel. 2017, when I did the whole vegetation survey down there, there was no more aspen, there was no more hazel, no more prairie, and the youngest oak was 60 years old. There's no more regeneration. I think that means you're extinct, doesn't it? I mean, if you're not regenerating, you're the density of the oaks also is so thick, I'm worried about a disease taking out all that oak. So kind of interesting. Here's a really interesting thing. We actually changed the vegetation from Francis Marshner's study, and we changed it in 1988. And the first yellow arrow up above, they took oak, we took as a collective, we took oak openings and oak barrens and changed it into oak woodland in 1988. And big woods became a forest. The first red arrow on top on the left-hand side, pine groves, white pine, you know, all the pines, we changed that to forest. Jack pine barrens and jack pine openings, we changed that to forest. We become very forest-centric in our vegetations. And remember that data was collected at a time at least 100 years before the fur trade came through and killed all the fur bearers. And what we do not think about, they killed every animal that they could eat. A lot of times fur posts had to move, not because the beaver ran out, but because the food ran out. HBC, Hudson Bay Company, just planned 6 pounds of meat per person per day. They didn't need anything else. And look at the clothes those guys are wearing. Fuck the skin. So they're wearing it, they're eating it, and with a gun, an elk standing up, or a caribou, or a moose, super easy. I wouldn't have been a trapper. I would have been a market hunter. So we don't think about how much that changed life. This went through, took all the animals out of Minnesota 100 years before that data was collected. Grand Portage closed down the fur post 1803. It was gone. The whole Superior Political region. It's also interesting to think the big woods really had a massive expansion at the same time that we suspect virgin soil epidemics. So this would have reduced Native American fire. And maybe that's why they expanded. I don't know, but it's just kind of an interesting thing. And in a sense, we can call this what Holling says command and control, where we think we know better than almost nature, and we put these labels on it, and then that's what we do, and that's dangerous. And so we should use less labels and more stories and telling what we're trying to do. And I think that's what Evan Larson is talking about too, is listening and sharing stories. Wow, this picture makes me religious, makes me want to go to church, because if that's what hell looks like, yeah, I mean, I don't want to go there. So anyways, that's the floodplain forest in the Minnesota River Valley and part of the refuge. This is a river valley in the Missouri River where it's active bison range. You can camp there right next to the walls. I'm not sure about you, but which would you rather, where are you going to see your wildlife? Where are you going to see, where's ecosystem services? Where's the soil building? Where's carbon being sequestered? Where's carbon coming out of the ground? Where's nitrogen coming in and heading for the water? And I want to do this paper so soon. So I'd be a great paper, Superior National Forest, comma, or Superior National Savannah. And it'd just be a very fun one to like think about. And so here's one of their keystone herbivores, the last one that we're still trying to, we've gotten rid of almost all the other big herbivores up there. And we're working hard on this one. It's native. I heard it called the worst pest to our northern forests this year. And it's a native species. About every 40 to 60 years, the spruce bagworm comes out, kills the fir trees. That sets that up for fire. And you can see that coincides with the fire. Their outbreaks coincide ahead of, maybe 5 to 10 years ahead of the fire record coming through these areas too. And they select for balsam fir. They release the white pines. So we started to spray these, and Holling wrote his papers, don't spray them. It's part of the natural ecosystem. That's a very important process in the boreal ecosystem. And they destroyed them. They destroyed them in 1959. And then he went on to develop concepts of resilience based on, that's where I right there. So we think we know better than what was here for thousands and thousands of years. So interesting. The Mabagi Creek Fire, 2011 up east of Ely. That's what it looks like now. And the Forest Service website for the Powell Trail, it said it looks more like a prairie than it does a forest. I'm like, yeah, of course, that's that whole resetting, rejuvenation, grassland back into pine, aspen, birch, savanna, back into, the grassland condition. Foraging. Some of the flowers along the side of the shore. You want to go see moose? Go up to that scar. Mike Sherrod up Fond du Lac, he counted a few years back 4.6 moose per square mile. And he said that every moose in that region just comes to that area, especially in the wintertime, because the food quality is so high. And there's white pines that survived the fire, and even little rabbits. Snowshoe, you gotta love those guys. And so we're climate centric, and this comes back to the Savannah situation. A lot of what we're seeing, it's like, oh, climax, old growth, maybe old growth timber is a better word than old growth forest. And we need all that in the landscape. We'll get to that in 1 second. But our primary focus has been on this old growth like that. And so we've really lost the right-hand side of that column. We know that the disturbance theory, that it's kind of in the middle, which is the perfect Savannah sweet spot. Some fire, some grazing, but if you take all that away, it becomes all trees. So that's the optimum. If you really just want ecosystem service, you shoot for that intermediate disturbance theory. But should that be our target? I used to think maybe you need it all. You need it all to have a resilient landscape. And so the really old growth materials and the young stuff, and they would have been in the same patterns on the landscape. So where was that old growth on your landscape? The oak woods or the pine forest or the balsam fir, or those places up in the temperate rainforest in Oregon, or those areas down in the Winona, the driftless area, just super tight, beautiful forest. And then you want to move it. You don't want to, except for the very far ends, the mud hole at the pond where the bison all go in and out of for every year for thousands of years, or the really old growth material. You want to hold those far ends, but then you want a lot of it to shift at different times. So super cool to think about restoration and that. I think our plant communities, and then we'll stop with plant communities, we'll go into restoration quick, like how we use this information to inform restoration, and then that's it. But I think plant communities in the future, I challenge the people that are going to be working on coming up with our next set of plant communities to be inclusive of the animals, the funguses, the microbes, different successional sears and what this could have looked like and where's it going, what's its younger, what are the disturbance regimes. So the page would not only have a list of plants by percent, but these were the mammals, these were the birds, these were the insects, these were the fungi that we know. These were the successional sears. If more fire glaciers came, what this would look like. If nothing came, where is this going? And not just kind of an invariant. It's like, this is what it is. So a list of species and numbers, So thinking about processing. So anyways, this is where I'm going with the restoration of part of this. And I think restoration needs to become process oriented. We need to start thinking about these plant communities. I like to think of this. Here's just kind of a paradigm shift. Is killing the weeds and planting the seeds actually site prep? And what we need and must, and the only thing we can restore are the keystone processes. And that just, now it's forever. Again, we need people living with the land constantly. So, what can we learn from this model? Again, we know we went off the cliff over in that section. We know it's a process of removing the biomass, the nitrogen builds up, it favors a completely different suite of trees called nitrophiles. And I'm just going to mention that Europeans are 30 years ahead of us in nitrogen. And right now I'm working on a project in Canada and British Columbia where we're assessing now nitrogen loads for cities, for airports and everything, because Canada's going to bring it on. You put more than 4 kilograms per hectare onto or two pounds per acre, literally. And you're going to have to change something, restore some. That's Europe, and that's coming to Canada. And we'll start to see what nitrogen does here too. Took people away from the land, just like Evan was saying. And it's funny how I watched the last couple minutes of this deal, and it was like, wow, and I just finished this. So we need to restore the people back to their land and their animals, This project's over 8,000 acres, total beautiful piece of property. You almost see Shakopee up there. You're looking west towards Shakopee, Minnesota. We need people's active agents as they have been for thousands of years. Biomass harvest can come in many forms, even selective timber harvest. We need to restore native herbivores or substitute domestic herbivores or mimic it by haying. And when we use fire, we really, again, right behind Evan on this is traditional ecological knowledge. The way they burn is so much different than what we are currently set up in the way they burn. They burn cold fires, snow fires, moist fires whenever it wasn't dangerous, and they made a lot of black. We call that biochar, and biochar immobilizes nitrogen and carbon. And yeah, just kind of interesting. We can do that. And finally, again, can we bring animals back on the landscape? I think we just have to. I think we just have to. We can spray weeds forever, or mow. Hay's awesome because we can at least use it for the animals. But can we actually bring the animals back on the land? You'll say, well, there's a difference between the bison and the cow, and really there probably is, but it's nothing compared to the difference between grazed and ungrazed. And those are heck cattle over there, which are being bred in Europe. The older breeds in Europe, they're breeding them back. And what they're trying to do, they think the genes of the auroch, the extinct auroch, is in there, and they're getting closer and closer to the auroch again. Some of the machines we use, we were scheduled to do like 260 acres this year, but the warm winter really prevented us from doing a lot of that work. I use a golden retriever quite a bit for scale. As you can see, that's the cutting head on that. And I'll just show you some work, and then we're just about done then. This is some of the work that we did, and we got, this is just in 6 months. That's the first growing season over there on that side. And just some techniques, again, thinking of hysteresis, where if I even want oak forest, pockets of oak forest in there, which did exist, but again, they were 10% of a unit, not dominant across the landscape like this. Think how susceptible that is to disease. And you know, it's all full of buckthorn underneath it too right now. But we want those forested areas, so figure out where you can have some oak forest for sure. So again, that 10%, 15%, whatever, and then 40% in the middle. 25% reduction, which is where you usually can find for by the social part of the ecosystem. Because they don't want, again, we cut trees and we consider, it's not a desirable thing to be associated with, is cutting trees. 50% reduction starts to get us into those areas. And again, notice how you can start to do pockets and leaving fringes completely up. So we've got forested areas. We always want that whole successional steer. The 70% reduction is where we're getting some of our best, and 80. And remember, as these trees start growing, it's going to be almost a logarithmic growing. And you can do 2 harvests. The initial one may look like 50 or 25. Do another one, because some of the trees will get good for timber. And then you can get to yours, and then you may want to keep it where you got 300-year-old oaks and 1-year-old oaks in the same area. And you can, that's how you're going to have fun. You can burn it. It'll attract the native herbivores, which will help to keep down the weeds. We can do some domestic if we want. The cowpie, see the meadowlark up there? Pull up Google image meadowlark, and 1 out of 10 pictures are sitting on cowpies, because it's that fermented silage from the herbivores that creates so much food in the terms of insects, funguses and bacteria, and insects are eating all this, and whole food webs of insects come flying up, and these birds just, that's what they eat. And the brown bat too. I mean, this is all gone. So these birds are starving to death, and I think the bats too, a big thing, more susceptible to disease when there's huge stress. So we really need to bring back those food webs so much. We can have both. So this is the woods that we looked at where we did the 80%. And I'll show you where we did oak woods, so almost a 10% removal. So 2013, that's the first growing season. That's like 6 months later, and that's from seeding. It was all bare soils. We got good seeding. You can contact me, and I can tell you kind of how we did that. This is 5 years after. There's no buckthorn as a problem. We've got enough sun. The grasses have come into a point where we've actually been able then to keep the buckthorn back, a little bit of strain. This is this fall I went there, and I was told there's no buckthorn, but the aspen are kind of spreading too fast. I said, you need deer or cow to still eat. And we kind of laughed, we kind of got it. But that's and we didn't hand spread it, but we just broadcast spread that on semi-frozen ground before a snowstorm came in about April. So it was all bare soil. Anyways, this is the same unit. Just we couldn't get heavy machinery over there, so we just cleared the buckthorn 10 years ago, and it looked good. But you can see the way the buckthorn starting to come back. So that's where that hysteresis really matters, as you fight and try to control those nutrient cycles, lower them at first, get that grass base. You can let it come back to oak woods in some of these pockets where oak woods is desirable. So finally, the last part of this question will just be Savanna offers is like the ultimate model for sustainability, especially like I talked about moving into a real-time solar energy world where we just can't have fossil fuels. Where this helps, water purification, soil, the production of food, the production of all kinds of quality items. Savanna was the ultimate model on Earth. Research opportunities, for people restoring the earth. Can you imagine just that one project I was talking about, 8,000 acres? How many people years it would take? Semi-retired, young people, old people, people sharing wisdom, people sharing stories, researchers out there. And this is, being made, and you're wearing one of the best fabrics in the world. So I think that's about it. I hope you've come to see how amazing Savanna is. Maybe I've changed the way that you look at it. I mean, when you're driving home or something like that, you're like, that was interesting. And just start your own journey of thinking and how amazing these ecosystems are. So but thank you so much for your time, and being here is always just great. Thanks, Lori.
Steve, you can leave your last slide up there if you want for a minute. I know you're super busy today. I'm so glad you you fit us in. Do you have time for a couple of questions? That's
Yeah,
okay.
no, I do if we have time. Oh my
Um,
God, I came in early.
it's
Wait
the
a minute,
buzzer.
I want to start over.
It's
Oh,
the
that's great.
timer.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Yes, no, I have all the time for you guys for sure.
Okay, I don't know that people watching realize your experience and that you have, not only are you an ecologist, but you're a farmer and you have a history with animals. So with that, there's grazing practices now are very popular and there's a lot of for hire grazers.
Mm,
And some of those ruminants are left, I think, too long on a patch of land.
mhm.
So they graze it way down to the soil almost. Can you comment on what's an appropriate amount of time or what the plants should look like when you move them?
Yeah, and you know, that's a really, really good question. And here's what I'm gonna tell you, and I just want you to think about this. It's the objective that you have for that piece of property. And what we need to do, and I keep saying it to myself, I need to do this. We need to figure out how those, and this is really a cool place to go, how these herbivores graze, when they graze, where they graze. And again, it was not random. So now we are typically moving the fence every day. You know, it's which for the grazer, ultimate. He's maximizing production and health of his pasture at the same time. It makes total sense for him. But as an ecologist looking for that diversity, that heterogeneity in the landscape, grazers didn't graze like that. So is there hybridization and we can actually use that? Now, by saying that, some areas got grazed a lot. There were trails that were, you know, you listen to the buffalo trails, there were trails like Osborne and Russell, the 1830s out in Montana, and it's over with by then. He's coming out of there. He's heading for Seattle. It was a newspaper report, Fountainland for 10 years. He said it's done with. Idaho's done. You know, they didn't even know where they were. But he's talking about riding his horse through these areas that were like 15 feet deep in sand and gravel where the bison, it was their highway. That's our US highways were built on those. So some areas really got hit hard. Some areas didn't get hit at all. Again, that 10%, that 10% maybe, and then in the middle, those different successional sears would come across. And that's where it's fun for you and your ecologists and your land managers. So let's say I wanted spring flowers, like wild strawberries, pussy toes, kitten tails. These are Midwest plants that grow in really short grass, and anemones. So I got my oak. I'm going to graze that thing in the middle of summer hard down to the ground, you know, not all the way, but just, you know, leave 2 inches and then get them out of there. And the next spring, the strawberries, the pussy toe, the kitten tails, the anemones, the bloodroot, they're going to come up. It's like, hey, that's awesome, man. Sunlight right away. It's April. This is great. And we'll see you next summer. And then in other areas, you do the reverse. You would graze in the, you know, the spring and you create midsummer. So some areas every other year, some areas like 3 times a year. I think this was common. This is a lot of these were cyclic in nature. So they would pass through areas in the spring and back through them in the fall. Again, the only, and I'll end it there, but the only thing I just want to inspire is like, oh yeah, there is no one way. There's multiple ways. And what the coolest thing is, like, we haven't figured that out. No one's even thought about it. So you want a PhD student to come up with like the 4 primary grazing method of, you know, our historic grazers and how we can mimic these with our domestic. That would be awesome. That's so cool. Thanks for listening.
I got, if you have time just for one more, so with climate change, for those of you who don't know, Steve is, one of the workingest guys I know in restoration. And, so are you seeing that you're already having to change your practices? Like, are you starting fire early and what's going on?
Yeah, I started a discussion with some of my people this like in December because it looked warm in December already. And we started talking about people, our group in Madison, they can't, they can't count on frozen ground anymore. So what we need to do is we need the discussion to do some of this larger cutting in these oak savannahs, with this big machinery. I'm just gonna add a caveat here that I thought even a long time ago that we need to use a lot of we need to use fossil fuels to help restore these ecosystems quick. I could put fossil fuels everywhere else, but if we're gonna use them for 5 more years, let's really restore a lot of land and then be done with it. Because our ecosystems are such poor shape right now, over vast areas of our landscape, oak woods, pine, aspen lands, that the water, the soils are washing away, the water is not purifying, and the invasive species are really just flying up into this area right now. So we really need to do a lot of this work. I mean, there's so much, there's millions of acres out there that just within the Midwest that needs it. And we're gonna have to do this work. We're gonna have to figure out ways how to do it in the summertime. And part of that's social. If we're gonna disturb a little ground, we'll fix it. And that's just what it's gonna have to be, Lori. So we're already making that discussion on what we're gonna do in the future. Yeah, it's interesting, but we'll see where we go.
Well, because the future is coming, it's
Here.
here already.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting that whole catastrophic regime shift. Finally, I'm starting to see some papers come out because I think about that with climate, and I call it the cocktail model. The gin and tonic's great on a hot summer day out on the back porch with the ice in it, but as soon as the ice melts, it's like boom, it warms up really fast. And so I think about our summer ice sheets, and I knew the catastrophic regime shift. I was already using it in my ecosystem restoration, and I thought, oh, is that the threshold mark when we lose those ice sheets and it warms up? Here's something that's really interesting about climate change too, is we're not really warm. That's the leg variable. That's the artifact of what's really happening. And that's worse because we're not cool. And so an organism or a machine or a mechanical, or an organism or a machine, if they're warming up, they're fine. As long as they can cool. As soon as they can't cool, it's catastrophic fast. And so that's what scares systems thinkers like myself, thinking, in whole different ways. We measure the average daily temp. We're measuring the cold, the nightest temp. Look at the Arctic, 50 degrees warmer. The lag phase is the one. Oh, and one other thing. I'm going to tell you this quick, like with savannahs. This is really kind of an interesting, I just want you to think about this totally, because I'm not sure I'm right, but here's my perception. The grasses with the deep roots and the big giant recalcitrant oak trees in that configuration store more carbon over the long run than what we call forest. And I'm looking at a lot of these afforested areas, like out my back door. I'm looking at the Superior Highlands right now. All the aspen are tipping over, and buckthorns just flying up through it. The half-life maybe 40 years, where at that point, those trees decompose and the carbon's going into the atmosphere. Whereas savannahs forever. It's just because the grasses keep pumping it deeper and deeper into the ground. So it's just kind of an interesting thought. And again, that's that slow and fast variable, the tortoise and hare. We see the fast variable. Oh, buckthorn. Dang it, it's invasive. Go kill it. We don't see the slow variable. It was nitrogen. Drip, drip, and shade. Drip, drip. They hit an axis in a multivariant hyperdimensional niche space, and boom, buckthorn took over. And we blame the buckthorn. No, we created the gradient. So it's the same concept. We just have to really, with the carbon, think of that carbon. It's the long term that we need to focus on, forever carbon storage, and that's where the savannah. And read Greg Ritellik's paper. Greg Ritellik, University of Oregon, Climate Cooling, Grassland Evolution and Climate Cooling. And when Pete Allen, Macedon Valley, brought me the paper, he said, I think you're going to like this. We had already predicted that in our lab, that it was the savannahs that cooled the earth with the grazing animals and the fires and etc. Sure enough, Ritellik just nails it. It's a beautiful paper. It's just a beautiful paper. He's got a couple of them like that. He's professor emeritus. He studied soils that are 400 million years old. And he studied dung beetles, fossilized dung beetles. Gotta love a guy that studies fossilized dung beetles, right, Lori? Honestly, God, there's a paper you can read, fossilized dung beetles of Tanzania. So anyways, yeah. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff. So think Savannah and think about it even as a model. Remember when I showed you that solar panel, the oak tree? And I said, this is the ultimate model of solar panel. It is.